Hi, I'm Steve Millar with Cozy, and we're here for 3 minutes-ish with Margaret Cassidy of Cassidy Law. Margaret is a lawyer that specializes in international business and working with the federal government, so she's here to give a couple of tips. Margaret, we were talking earlier, and we were talking about this whole idea of doing business globally. And not a lot of folks do business globally. Some folks are intimidated by it. Some are just not sure how to go about it. But when I'm thinking about going global, what are some things that I need to think about from a legal perspective that you often talk to clients?
So from a legal perspective, I think a lot of businesses think to themselves, it's going to be just like doing business in America. But there's something we have in America called the rule of law. And what that does for us is it gives us stability around our contracts, it gives us integrity and transparency around our government. When you go over to other countries, you can enter a contract, but you don't know how that contract's going to play out. Can you walk away from it? Can you actually terminate it? Or is it going to live beyond when you no longer want to do business with that person? Similarly, corruption is huge outside the United States. We have our own problems here, as we see all the time, but we have a little bit more checks and balances in place. So when you go to another country, take China, for example, a lot of the Middle East, even places in Eastern Europe where almost all the business folks you're interacting with really are government officials. They're party members, Communist Party members. They work for the government one way or another, which may not be transparent to us as Americans. At times they seek bribes in order to get business done more efficiently. They tell you got to do that. And you really have to have plans in place to deal with both of those contingencies.
I imagine they don't call it a bribe, right?
They don't call it a bribe at all. They don't call it a bribe at all. In fact, I have a great story. I was helping a client and they wanted the client to pay an exorbitant amount of money to unload a shipping container. When we asked the local government to give us that regulation for that price payment, the email document I received from the government official actually included clear whiteout changing the actual amount of the required payment or fine to get into that port.
So there was a convenience fee, right?
It was a convenience fee of exorbitant proportions. So those are the things as a business you got to be ready to handle, and you've got to be ready to manage prospectively and then be prepared when it happens. Similarly, around your contracts too, you have to understand exactly at some level what sort of contractual approaches they're taking in that nation.
So differences in legal structure and approaches that maybe aren't so apparent to us. So also, you know, besides what happens in that country, I guess there's a whole set of things to think about in terms of what you're really allowed to sell into other countries or what some of the restrictions are that our own government puts on doing business internationally.
That's a really important part of it as well. So as we go global as U.S. businesses, America is trying to protect its own interests, but then also to further our policy agenda. So you read about trade restrictions in the paper and what Congress is doing about that, but it's important to understand it will impact where you can sell your products. Sometimes you could sell, for example, a chocolate bar to any country in the world, seemingly because it's not a military product. But at the same time, the U.S. government may tell us at any given time, you can't sell to the Sudanese or you can't sell to the Russians, for example, certain things. So you have to know what your product is, are there export regulations, and then what nations you want to sell that into, and are you allowed to sell into that nation?
Because I imagine there are some components in a product or a service that the government feels still has some, you know, restriction around U.S. interests, I guess.
Right, that's exactly right. So there's two ways to think about it. What country are you going to sell into? And do we have restrictions against that country or persons of that country or businesses of that country? And what is your product? Is it something that the U.S. government wants to control for one reason or another?
Got it. So, and then a third aspect of, I guess, doing business internationally is beyond the work you're doing in that country or the U.S.'s restrictions, there's usually a whole supply chain, right, to deliver what is happening on behalf of your business. What are some of the concerns around your supply chain?
So around supply chain, it's a great way to manage your supply chain by working globally because you can get some real cost benefits. But at the same time, first off, you got to know who it is that you're buying the supplies from, who's performing those services overseas. And you got to look out for things like human trafficking, child labor, as well as corruption through that process, and frankly, counterfeit parts. So as you develop a global supply chain, you need to identify those risks. Those are not only a business risk to you or a reputational risk, but they're a legal risk because the U.S. has laws that prohibit businesses from engaging in activities that may further or participate in human trafficking or child labor. And you could get sucked into those violations because of something one of your suppliers is doing overseas.
So just like your supply chain sort of creates added value from the raw materials to product, it also brings added liabilities and exposures as well.
Right.
So should we just not do business internationally?
No, you should absolutely do business internationally.
Okay.
But I think one of the most prudent things a business can do is, as they're identifying the other risks and how they want to get a return on investment from any business endeavor you want to do, you need to think about that overseas, and you need to think about what those risks are, identify them, and come up with a way to mitigate them prospectively before you're caught in the problem that you can't unwind.
And that's exactly why folks like you exist, to help folks think through these issues.
Well, thank you.
Consider what they're doing as they go to expand their business. So thank you. That's 3 Minutes-ish with Margaret Cassidy of Cassidy Law. If you need help on the international side, sounds like Margaret's got a number of ideas for you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.